Okay, well, I think it's time to start. It's 9 a.m. in the Netherlands, and I think 4 p.m. in Manila, and somewhere in between for our guests. So I would like to welcome you to our webinar, our first of two webinars that we'll be having. There's been about a 2-year project and maybe even longer collaboration between the Asian Development Bank Water Sector, IHE Delft, and the International Water Management Institute. So we would like to showcase some of the work we've been doing on water productivity today, and then tomorrow we have another webinar on water accounting. So I will be co-hosting the webinar. My name is Lauren Zielinski. I work in the water accounting and water productivity program within IHE Delft, and I'm also co-hosting today with Jelle Beekma from the Asian Development Bank. A few rules for this webinar. We ask that you please keep your video and audio off during the webinar. It helps us focus on speakers and the presentations. During the presentation, if you have questions, please use the chat function. So Jelle and I will be watching the chat, and I'll be collecting the questions, and at the end when we have a Q, present them. You can also introduce yourself in the chat. We like to see who you are, where you come from, what sector you work in, and you can see who else is in the webinar as well. Once we finish with the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, a question and answer session, which I'll share your questions you've already asked. And if you would like to ask more, there are two options. You can keep using the chat function and I will ask them to the panel, or you can use the raise hand function. You'll see that in the small bar at the bottom of your screen. And if you raise your hand, you have the opportunity to then turn on your microphone and ask your questions to the panel directly. And after this webinar, we will be sharing the recording as well as the presentations with you all. So please make sure to check back on the ADB website for that. So the agenda today, it'll be about 1 hour. Jelle will start with a quick introduction to the project and the activities that were happening for water productivity. Our first speaker will be Dr. Poulad Karimi. He's an international water productivity expert, and he'll talk about remote sensing for water productivity assessments. Following him will be Dr. Sajid Parith from IHE Delft Institute for Water Education, and he'll discuss more in detail about mapping for evapotranspiration, biomass, and water productivity. And our last presenter will be Dr. Lisa Maria Rebello from the International Water Management Institute, and she'll talk about decision-making using water productivity analyses. And after that, we have some time set aside for answering questions and having a nice discussion around the activities and water productivity. So a lot of work has been done as part of this effort. I think you'll see as we move along, and it was just impossible to capture it in one webinar. So we are using what we're calling a blended approach. So in addition to this recording, in these presentations, we'll also have other materials that are becoming available soon. So that will be all the water productivity reports and some short summary videos. We'll also have online reference materials that you can look at, short training videos, examples from trainings that we've conducted as part of this project. If you're interested to learn more about how to do water productivity yourself, IHE offers a free course on our OpenCourseWare platform for water productivity and water accounting using WAPOR, so you can check that out there. It's free to enroll. We also are working on putting all of the data generated through these activities on a portal, which is hosted by the FAO. So in the upcoming weeks or months, check out their AquaMaps app. But if you would like to look at a preview, you can check out our waterinag.org/application website to see how you could interact with this kinds of data. So that photo in the corner is an example of what it looks like. I can also put these links in the chat during the presentation so you can take a look. So like I said, in the upcoming weeks, all of these will be made available and they'll be posted on both the ADB Development Asia website as well as wateraccounting.org. And we will send you all a nice email to tell you when it's ready. So with that, I would like to let Jelle take over and talk a bit more about all the work that's been happening.
Thank you very much, Lauren. That was a very good introduction. For the people who know already a bit of the Asian Development Bank activities in water accounting and water productivity, you know that this is sort of a second round. We did projects before in Cambodia, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Indonesia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. And this is an expansion on that. And what we do here is that we try to use somewhat different approaches and look more into how we can do this for a specific bank requirement. So looking more at the investment and what kind of information we need for that. And on top of that, we have, of course, also expanded to new areas. Next slide, please. So here you see a list of the projects that we have done for water productivity specifically. Tomorrow we will discuss more on water accounting. You see we have done 2 projects in India, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. That is projects on water productivity that are then supporting the project that you see on the right-hand side on the slide. Those are the ADB projects. One in Kazakhstan, unfortunately that project is postponed, but we do water productivity work in irrigation systems, and that's hopefully useful for the future to identify investments. In Cambodia, where we look specifically at the 4 sub-projects under a larger irrigation agriculture improvement project. In Mongolia, where we have looked at 2 small center pivots of a research institute, and in Sri Lanka, where we have looked at 4 river basins. Next, please. So what has changed is, like I said, we start from strict protocols. This is water accounting, this is water productivity, and what you exactly need. For example, in water productivity, one of the things that sometimes feels like the purpose is that you need so many information on crop calendar, crop requirements, crop timings, and that makes the advantage that you have by remote sensing, looking at it from space and having regular images, a bit less. So we have looked, can we blend this a little bit? Of course, the water accounting comes in looking into, have we sufficient water resources for the development that we propose, and can the water distribution over the basin be improved, and do we still have enough environmental water? So specifically here we look at low and high water productivity, and then to see also what is behind these temporal spatial patterns of productivity, and can we do something with projects on that? Can it be related to infrastructure underperformance? Can it be related maybe to institutional things that we can improve? Next slide. Now this is stolen, in fact, from the project that Lauren already was talking about, the WAPR approach, the Water Productivity Improvement Project. But we're following a bit the same sort of approach, where we scan, we look what is going on, we make a diagnosis of the different systems that we see, and then we try to develop solutions. And for the bank, of course, those are related to infrastructure developments, as well as what kind of institutional framework you need and management you need to best benefit from those. And that, of course, you do with the stakeholders. So that's a sort of ideal approach where we look, use the remote sensing information in improving investments as well as the management of the investments. Next slide, please. So what I think is always important also to look a bit philosophical. Why do we need this? Yeah, and one of the very nice things of remote sensing and of the water accounting, but also the productivity, is that it is an objective system. Everybody who would use it would have the same sort of information. So there's often all kinds of discussions on water distributions, but there are different views. And what you have with the remote sensing and the standardized energy approach that we have, that you would come to the same results. And this caricature where one person at the left is looking and sees 4 and the other 3, and they're both right, you can avoid to some extent. I found this an interesting one. Next. Here, something we have a lot of discussion always about validation and about the calibration. And this is a photograph of rainfall in the Philippines, Clark City. And you see the dark lines in the center. There's very heavy rainfall, and then on the right and on the left there's nothing. And quite often we calibrate the remote sensing images with a rainfall gauge of 11 centimeters diameter. And you can sort of see here that wherever that rainfall gauge is, it makes a big difference. Is it just under the rainfall, or is it a bit further? So there might be a case that actually this sort of integrated measurements that we get from remote sensing are not necessarily worse. we need to know more about it, of course. Next one, please. Last one, if we talk about water productivity, we have very much focused on water productivity. It's part of the SDG 6.4 as well. And this one here, you see the paddy rice production on the horizontal axis, and then the water productivity on the vertical. And you see that when we come to about 4 tons of rice on the bottom, more or less in the middle, the curve flattens off. This is a curve from many different cells. What the productivity is related to the yield. And of course, the farmer wants to have the highest yield. So already some people suggest that you have to actually look at marginal gains per additional water used, if there's a clear pricing principle in it. I just wanted to bring it up that water productivity alone doesn't necessarily give us the answers, but that we need to look into more still. And I'm sure that our speakers that are following me are going to discuss this in more detail. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the presentations of the fieldwork that we have been doing.
Great, thank you, Jelle. Really appreciate that nice introduction and the motivation for why water productivity is so important. So now I would like to introduce our first speaker. So Dr. Poulad Karimi is a water resource and irrigation engineer with more than 15 years of international experience. He currently leads and contributes to several international advisory, research, and capacity development projects on water resources development and irrigation in Africa and the Middle East. He has been involved in numerous research projects pertaining to basin and field level productivity, water scarcity management, small-scale irrigation interventions, water use efficiency, and the groundwater irrigation energy nexus. And he has also been helping lead the development of the Water Counting Plus framework. So Dr. Poulad Karimi, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to speak to you and a little bit have this talk after what Jelle did, which is a very nice introduction to water productivity. So basically, what I'll be talking about is a bit about water productivity and also showcasing how remote sensing is useful for water productivity mapping and in relation to understanding how water productivity varies. Let's start with water productivity itself. I mean, water productivity is an indicator, right? I mean, it's a set of, we have a set of performance indicators for monitoring and evaluation of irrigation water management. And in there, we have crop water productivity, which in short is the relationship between the output derived from water use into water consumed. Next. However, when you define water productivity as this fraction, the numerator would relate to which crop, and the denominator, next, will have to do with the drop. So basically, we have two concepts here. We have the water use, and we have the production or the outcome of that water use. These two vary based on scale. Next. In the two important scales for this work, we have field, which starts, I mean, at the farmer's unit. So he or she would manage his field, the field, and then the water consumption happens mainly through evapotranspiration. And the production can be explained in terms of physical production of a kilogram per unit of area. And then water consumption could also be divided to transpiration and evaporation. So this can be used by the farmers, by the scientists at this level to be able to understand the dynamics of water movement in the soil profile, and also by farmers to understand how they can improve their productivity and how they can improve the way they use water. Next. If you look at across different scales, so we can from crop to field to farm to irrigation system and to a basin, this table summarizes how we can define these two terms of the production and the water term. So it's always going to be about how we are using an actual or net use of water from transpiration to evapotranspiration, go to at the basin level to total available water, and the production term in the terms of outputs, or it could turn out to be monetary value of those outputs. So when you do have these two factors, you can start looking back at how you are using your water. And then if water use in this location is more beneficial for you than another location. And those are essential things for making decisions, because imagine if you want to increase water productivity in general, you need to know where to focus on and where you will be getting the more gains for the investment that you make. So based on these kind of analysis, you can see where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and then decide based on the situation where you want to put your money. Next. So when we know what kind of input do we need to calculate water productivity, the big missing part is how do we calculate those? So traditionally, people did it at a smaller scale using field data, but that couldn't work, and that's cannot be replicated. It'll be costly, and that's why the more people are turning towards remote sensing data, which is because it's low cost and you get high return. You can cover a large area by processing a single tile of image of a satellite sensor, and that gives you quite a lot of possibilities for specific uses in agriculture, because it actually covers a lot big area, and then doing the surveys, doing the field work would be a very costly solution. Next. So you can get remote sensing based information and then turn that to information that is relevant to explain what are happening and what is happening in your field. You can calculate your actual water consumption. You can know about water productivity. You can define crop types. You can know about the stresses that your crops are going through, estimation of rainfall, and then calculating the performance based on those factors, and also looking into biomass production. So we have been using this for, I think, as a community of remote sensing for ag water people from mid-90s with the work of such as Professor Bastiansens, who led the way to some of these basically methods and applications that we currently also use. And we have been using quite a bit the model called Sebal, which my colleagues Sajid will explain a little more there, and then to be able to do detailed water productivity analysis. Next. There are different methods for mapping evapotranspiration using remote sensing. We have surface energy balance, as I said, model like Sabal works that way. We have vegetation indices that we can use actually to estimate crop water use or evapotranspiration based on the basic KC and vegetation index, and also based on the land surface temperature. There are also other methods that are building on the famous FAO Penman-Monteith, such as FAO Vapor, that has been mentioned quite a number of times. Basically, these old methods, they capture the stresses, and then they are able to calculate or estimate water consumption based on the signatures that received from satellite. Next. So I can show you an example. This is a case study that has been done under this project from Karnataka in India. It's a NLBC irrigation scheme, which is about 500,000 hectares flat. The first map that you see now is evapotranspiration. So if you look into the legend, it goes from 100 to 900, and this is evapotranspiration over Kharif season in 2018. So you see areas in the one that is marked number 1, which is the CCA1, that is pretty high evapotranspiration, and you see that up north you have much lower evapotranspiration. So it perfectly kind of captures the variation in evapotranspiration rate. When you put the next map, which is the calculated above ground biomass production, now you have the two terms, right? We have the water use in evapotranspiration on the left, and we have the production in above ground biomass production in the map in the middle. So we can see how the biomass production varies across the scheme during the same period. We can see areas which have low biomass production versus the areas that they have higher biomass production. Just to remind you that biomass production is related to the yield. basically our yield, or the what we harvest from a field, is harvest index, which is the index that is defined by scientists to relate biomass production to the actual harvested crop. So when you look into biomass map, you actually have a good distribution of how your yield is produced in your scheme. And if you put these two together, next, we'll see a water productivity map, which shows that how water productivity varies in this scheme. So you can see in areas that are water productivity high, this is going back to what Yela said, right? I mean, while we have the good distribution of water productivity estimate here, we also have to keep in mind that sometimes, because water consumption is low in some areas, water productivity could show up high. That's why we have to, when we are analyzing all these maps, we have to actually put them next to each other, understand the dynamics of the ground, and then move towards making decisions. Next. You can also extract information based on the geophysical scale that you are interested in. So you pick up your area of interest. You can drive statistical data now for each crop that you have for any section that you want. For instance, this is the actual evapotranspiration for 3 crops within the same scheme in 2019 Kharif. In some of the scheme, clearly water consumption is higher than the others for different crops. The first one in NLBC, you see much higher, about 650 millimeter for paddy, and whereas for the fourth one or the second or third one, you see much lower number, which around between 300 and 430. Next. Also, you can do the same with the biomass production maps, because once you have the spatial data from remote sensing coming in, doing the rest is easy. Basically, you actually impose the other layer and extract information. That is very useful feature, because then this integrated data allows you to kind of extract for the area there you are interested in. Next. And also you can see, if you have a good crop map, you can actually extract data, crop water productivity per crop for different CCAs, and then understands what is the average, how high or low is. One big takeaway here is also going back to what I said, where production is high or water consumption is high, it doesn't mean that our water productivity is high. So basically, we have to see what are the opportunities. What can we do to keep production high, yet reduce water consumption to have higher water productivity? But where we have we seem to have higher water productivity, and yet we have low biomass production, the focus has to go to producing more yield and controlling water consumption. Next. We could also look into how water is distributed and when and where more water and irrigation is needed. We do this through an index we call relative water deficit, which compares the evapotranspiration actual to the maximum rate of the crop evapotranspiration. And this is coming out of the, if you want to read more about it, you can read the FAO 66. So you can see the red circling areas are those areas that are constantly coming up in all the 3 years of this analysis as areas that are actually having low water availability and low evapotranspiration. Basically, this could mean that these are areas to focus investment to help increase access to water, because the main constraint in these areas is actually access and having availability of irrigation water. Next. And then we have areas where it seems to be water deficit is very low and there have been always water available. And these areas are generally could be areas that we focus investment to help reduce water consumption, because reducing water consumption in these areas could lead to availability of water to where water is. So if you look a little bit closer to the how this NLBC scheme is located and what this section mean, you can see the relationship between different sections to the water source, which is Narayanpur Dam. So basically, you see that in number 1 and 5, those are the closest one to the water source. And this is exactly where we see in the map that they have lower deficit of water. And the areas that come further down, they actually have always water deficit and water shortage. This shows us that we need to basically think about distribution. And that distribution and that knowledge ground knowledge is important. So I would say the best method to get grounded solution to good ideas for investment is to do the remote sensing measurements, yet collect a very thorough ground knowledge. And then there we have grounded solution. So to just summarize the key points of the talk, I would like to bring your attention to the importance of increasing water productivity, because it's a challenge that posed. We have to do better with the water that we have. Crop water productivity is a broad indicator that encompasses how we use water and then turn that to benefits in agriculture. It can help us to improve our policies, guide our investments, and also it's not only related to when water is scarce, because even in areas that water is not scarce, the competition for water is high, and then we may be able to use water in other uses. So it's important to keep monitoring and identify gaps in interventions, and a good method to do that is the use of remote sensing, which gives us a high spatial and temporal scales, and it can connect our global scales to continental, national, basin, and irrigation scheme and the field. So there would be newer and future missions of remote sensing. So there would be more opportunities in future to use remote sensing to support water productivity analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Karimi. I think that was a really nice overview of how water productivity using remote sensing works and the potential applications. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Sajid Parith. He is a researcher and lecturer in remote sensing at IHE Delft. He focuses on remote sensing technologies and land and water use monitoring and has more than 10 years of international experience. His main research in recent years has been to develop crop monitoring systems by satellite-based estimation of water use and water productivity at different scales in the spatial and temporal domain. He contributes to several projects in Asia and Africa funded by the European Union, Dutch ministries, UN, FAO, and Asian Development Bank. Sajid obtained his PhD in natural sciences from the Freie Universität Berlin, and he was a DAAD scholarship recipient in Germany during his MSc in photogrammetry and geoinformatics at HFT Stuttgart. So Sajid, welcome, and we're happy to have you here.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for the detailed introduction. Welcome everyone to my short talk on mapping evaporative biomass and water productivity. This talk is mainly based on our experience which we developed over the ADB project over the last 2 years and during the phase 1 as well. And thanks to the talk by Jelle and Pulat, so the foundation they laid, I will be building upon that, and I will talk from a technical perspective how we are developing or how we are computing evapotranspiration, biomass, and water productivity at a different scales, and do we have any scope for developing or setting up an operational monitoring system exclusively using remote sensing data. So why remote sensing for mapping water productivity? I think Pulat laid a very good introduction and foundation to this. The main reason is that we have Earth observation satellites which offer data covering the entire globe. So where is not a question now. We can get anywhere in the over the land and water now. So with this, it is possible now to monitor at a very high spatial and temporal scale, to have monitoring from national basin to field level. And there are newer and future missions coming up, as just Pulat finished his talk. And in the diagram on the right side, I demonstrate an example where data from satellites or Earth observation satellites are using remote sensing techniques to map actual evapotranspiration at a continental scale over the entire Africa, which is coming from a database called WAPR, developed by FAO and other partners. And this database itself is at 250 meters, which is quite high when we consider from the perspective of continent. And from that data, we can zoom to at a national level. In this example, I've shown the country of Iran at the same scale, where we can do analysis on actual evapotranspiration at national scale. And from there, we can go to basin, and from there we can go to scheme. So you can see that from basin onwards, we can also look at a different spatial resolution, which is a higher one at 30 meters, using a satellite called Landsat. And scheme, or we can interpret the data at a field level. So this this picture actually depicts the very advantage of using Earth observation data and remote sensing techniques to monitor different agriculture water-related variables, including evapotranspiration, biomass, and water productivity. A small figure on the left-hand side actually idea of remote sensing. So we have a feature in space, and with remote sensing and Earth observation data, which periodically capture Earth, we can actually capture the changes over time, which is shown in the y-axis. So a remote sensing based operation system. So with these projects and many other projects which we have here, we work on, what we are trying to develop now is how to leverage these open satellite data sets to develop a remote sensing based operational systems to get a snapshot of how a particular irrigation scheme or a basin is performing in terms of water use and production. So as you can see that in this particular operation system, we have mainly three components. One is crop type mapping. The second one is water use and biomass estimation and crop water. And the third one is actually to compute crop-based water productivity using different techniques like machine learning, SABAL, and a post assessment where we do diagnosis. So it's pretty much related to what Yele showed in his presentation on scan, diagnosis, and solutions. So one of the reasons why we are it can be accomplished is we have more and more data sets available. We can do that with the open data sets available from different satellites. We can do that near real time. And this solution can be extended geographically. So once we have a system in place, we can move from one scheme to another scheme pretty easily at multiple scales in time and space. So we have implemented this three-step solution, and with ADB project itself, we have tried it in a different study areas. Next, please. Focusing on the first step, which is the crop type mapping, with our partners in Bangalore, ACIWRM, we collected the field data from Narayanpur Left Bank Canal, NLBC, for which the results were shown by Pulad as well on different type of crops. So the data which is collected from the different type of crops, for example, in this figure, we show the data or the points collected from paddy and how the data or how the reflectance data from satellite differ for each crops. So you can see that in this figure, in the second row, you can see that how each crop varies over different spectral bands. And in the third row, you can see that how different crops vary in a time scale. For example, the NDVI changes over time. So for paddy and cotton. And this information is used in a machine learning model. Next, please. To come up with a high resolution crop type map. And we established it in a cloud computing platform called Google Earth Engine. So for example, here we can see that with using the field data collected, we have come up with a crop type map which demonstrate or which gives us the extents of three major crops in NLBC in Karnataka, which is cotton, paddy, and red gram. Next, please. And this crop type map forms the basis of our further calculations of water use and biomass estimation, and finally crop water productivity. So when we look at water use and biomass estimation, please, we use something called SABAL, which Pulad briefly mentioned, the energy balance model from Bas Janssen. So we used a package called Python PySABAL, which is Python implementation of SABAL developed by IHE Delft. It's a semi-automated actually evapotranspiration biomass computation. It's open source code available in GitHub. The figure demonstrates a brief of various steps implemented in this library, where we can obtain actually evapotranspiration for the date of acquisition of these different satellites. And we have applied, or we have developed an approach where we apply a temporal and spatial interpolation technique to gap fill these maps at seasonal scale. Next, please. One of the key feature of our system is the gap filling approach, where we give a priority to gap filling in temporal scale, because most of the satellites are in the optical domain, which is hindered by heavy cloud cover, especially in the tropical part. So we use a temporal approach, temporal interpolation approach, where we take the nearest observation in time to do a local weighted regression to fill the gaps due to clouds. So you can see in the bottom in the map, you can see that at a basin scale how we tried to fill the gaps using a temporal interpolation, then followed by a spatial interpolation. So this is already automated in our system, where if we implement or if we compute this seasonal evapotranspiration at a scheme level, we get this gap-filled seasonal maps, which can be used further to compute water productivity for different crops. Next, please. To focus on the last part, which is the crop water productivity. So finally, after getting this seasonal evapotranspiration biomass, the final step is to compute crop water productivity or water productivity. We demonstrate two studies which actually demonstrate different scales. The one is from Karnataka, NLBC, which is a large scheme of area around 450,000 hectares. That also shows how large data can be used for this kind of assessment, because per map it is around 5 million pixels at a 30-meter resolution. We processed around 3 years of data. And here you can see in the map as an example, the crop water productivity of paddy. As shown by Pulad, it also shows how water productivity varies over different CCAs. At the same time, a contrasting example on the right side, which is coming from Mongolia, where we focused on 2 center pivots using the data from the same satellite in Mongolia, with a very small area of 90 hectares, only 1,000 pixels per map, and we processed 1 year data to come up with the seasonal evapotranspiration biomass and biomass water productivity. So these are 2 case studies which we want to demonstrate using the same operational system component which we developed, and how we can use it to come up with this kind of seasonal maps and evaluate it. I think someone is sharing the screen, Laura. So how we are doing it? So we are doing it using the latest developments in ICT mainly. So what we are aiming at is to develop it into an automated near real-time monitoring system. So what we use is higher performance computing in the cloud infrastructure. There are many major players like Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. There are other private players as well, like Hessner in Germany. For example, in our case, we use a rented cloud-based server from Hessner in Germany, where we established a framework in a Linux framework where we can do big data processing using open source libraries. So the recent developments in ICT has really reduced the cost of these hardwares, and these implementations are becoming more and more practical. So the libraries and the open data and the reduced cost of ICT is facilitating these operational systems using remote sensing, where we can automate every step of it, right from the acquisition of the data to the assessment of water productivity. Next, please. To conclude, so the availability of high resolution frequent data sets. So we have the satellites data available over the globe in every 5 days now by combining different satellites. So that is one aspect which we are looking at, how we can combine these satellites to come up with a high temporal scale observation. And it helps in monitoring land and water resources now. As I said, combined with the advanced ICT tools, mapping from farm to national to continental scale at high resolution is more and more feasible now. And the reliability of this data, reliability of the derived data is improving with the latest algorithms. Although the need of the hour is the validation protocols, which we are again dealing with different projects now. So there are different projects funded by banks and ministries, specifically focusing on developing protocols of assessment and validation protocol. For example, the water PIP project, which we are part as IHE, is a very good example of how we can do that. And the capacity development to set up this monitoring system at different scales is the need of hour. The post-processing steps are critical. So there are many approaches available. So we have to really find the robust method which will work on areas which are critical of clouds, especially in the property area. And it also reiterates the fact that we need a dynamic land use of type to derive water productivity at for different crops. And because why dynamic? Because these land use types, especially the agricultural land use type, varies over seasons. So we need that to accurately compute water productivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parith. I think that was a great overview of the latest technologies that we're using and how they work for us to analyze water productivity. So we would like to introduce our final speaker for today. Is Dr. Lisa Maria Rebello. She is a principal researcher at the International Water Management Institute. Her research involves the development of new innovative Earth observation-based methodologies to improve the understanding of interactions between basin scale hydrology and ecological function, as well as water availability and allocation, and also working to identify options for improving management of water resources at multiple scale. Lisa leads IMI's water productivity and water accounting portfolio. So we're happy to have you here, Lisa. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Lauren, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to move beyond the concepts and the data production and the specifics that we've heard from my colleagues to look at how the data can be used in practice. And building on the approach presented previously, the applications which I'm going to talk about contribute to a project which aims to increase agriculture and irrigated water productivity particularly, and to enhance resilience to climate change in selected river basins in Sri Lanka. So this analysis contributes to broader project activities which aim to identify the main underlying causes for low irrigated agriculture and water productivity in the locations we're looking at, and attempts to address these through different entry points, including the improvement of water resource management at basin scale, improvement of existing irrigation infrastructure, as well as institutional strengthening and capacity building to improve the performance of the agricultural sector in general, particularly in areas such as asset management and maintenance. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Lisa, I'll just quickly interrupt. Can I have everyone turn off their microphones? We're hearing some interruption in the background, as well as your cameras. So thank you very much. Here you go, Lisa.
Thanks. So I'm going to give an overview of 3 applications, and these start with the data produced through the water productivity assessment, following the same steps that Sajid just introduced, but moves beyond this with the second 2 examples to look at how these data can be integrated into further applications. So the water productivity study has focused on river basins that are mostly located in the northern province and in the Uva province in Sri Lanka, which is shown on the map in the north and the south. And these river basins straddle dry and intermediate climatic zones, and they have a large number of smallholder farmers cultivating under both rain-fed and irrigated conditions. So these areas have been identified as being vulnerable to climate change, as requiring interventions in irrigation and water resources management to develop resilience to climate change, and are not currently covered by ongoing or planned interventions. So for those of you who are not familiar with the setting, in Sri Lanka, a typical irrigation system consists of a series of catchments, each with a reservoir or a tank at the head from which water is diverted for irrigation. And the return flow from the irrigated land forms the inflow to the tank downstream. So these tank cascade systems have multiple uses, including domestic supply, as well as sustaining natural vegetation and, of course, irrigation. And there's a huge variation in the size of the cascades, ranging from a few small tanks to the larger cascades, which involve multiple large and small tanks, and sometimes interbasin transfers as well. So the individual schemes in the cascades are a wide mix of sizes and have various characteristics. So the remote sensing-based water productivity assessments have been undertaken in this setting to support the selection of priority basins and locations for sub-projects, as well as to inform river basin management plans. And the same approach has been applied as presented by Poulad and Sajid, and producing a similar set of indicators related to crop water consumption, crop growth, and water productivity. Next slide, please. So one of the indicators which Poulad presented, the relative water deficit, has been used here. And what we've done is we've used this to identify the areas that suffer the most from lack of irrigation water availability. And the map that I have here characterizes this for the two northern basins in the northwestern province. So this indicator broadly shows where irrigation water is insufficient to meet the crop water requirement, and it can be used to support investment decisions at that broad level that aim at improving equity in irrigation service delivery across similar cropping systems. So really it's a tool for targeting at the basin scale. In this case, the indicators have been calculated over a 5-year time period, so we've implemented the PISABLE approach over 5 years for 2 irrigation seasons. And they're being used to help identify where systems are working well and where upgrades or improvements may be required. So really, as Jelle mentioned at the beginning, those extremes, the extremes of performance. So what I have on the slide here, the data which have been summarized across all 5 years and for each season. So you have the Maha season on the left and the Yala season on the right. And we've categorized them into 3 performance levels based on the water deficits experienced. So you have tanks with low performance, consistently high deficits in red. You have tanks with high performance, consistently low deficits in blue, and anything in between is red. Next slide, please. So looking at a few examples, in the yellow circles, we have small tanks in cascades, which are performing well in the Maha season on the left, but not so well in the Yala season on the right. Next slide. We have here medium-sized tanks, which are underperforming in both the Maha and the Yala season. Next slide. And finally, in this example, we have cascades, part of cascades, which perform well in the Maha season and perform well in both the Maha and the Yala season. So that's the blue dots in the yellow circles. So these assessments have been conducted here for the purpose of identifying lower performing infrastructure in order to prioritize investments. So to identify where water delivery is working and where it clearly is not. As we've discussed, as Sajid and Poulad mentioned, a more in-depth understanding of the remote sensing outputs and therefore any appropriate interventions and solutions, so the last activity in the spectrum that Jelle mentioned, in order really needs to be linked to field assessments. So as an example, the outputs are being used as the primary criteria here to select potential areas for groundwater monitoring within the 4 river basins. And the purpose is really to establish a consistent basis for assessing sustainable use of groundwater as a supplementary input to minimize the water deficits within agricultural areas within the basins that we're looking at. So based on previous analysis, several pilot cascades have been identified and the performance indicators from the PISABLE approach have been used to select the command areas within these, which demonstrate persistent deficits, and those locations form the basis for further field assessments to identify appropriate locations for groundwater monitoring sites. Next slide, please. So the data are also provided as a provincial summary because the institutional framework for management of the tanks is complex. And so in order to summarize at the various levels, we provided at the provincial level as well for the irrigation offices, which operate within the provincial and district boundaries, as well as the project implementation units, which are based in each province. So really the key messages from this level of analysis is that results vary more from year to year than from province to province. There are greater deficits during the Yale season, as would be expected across all provinces, and the area which experiences high deficits was double during the Yale season when compared to the Maha season. So the high level of water shortage in the Yale season confirms that water scarcity is the main constraint for improved food production within this system. But as I mentioned, any further interpretation of the outputs and developments of solutions and interventions needs to be location specific, considering a range of factors and conditions, and this requires further interactions with scheme managers, farmers and extension services. Next slide, please. So this is being addressed through a second tool. This is an asset management tool developed by IHE in consultation with ADB and the Department of Irrigation and targeted at irrigators in the basins. So it's a GIS program for planning, operating and managing asset networks based on spatial and non-spatial data, which relate irrigation systems investments. And the software has the capability to store, to analyze multi-layered assets information, and to manipulate individual and aggregated outputs to improve management and maintenance. So the remote sensing indicators on water productivity and irrigation performance are an input into the asset management system through the highlighted orange box on the slide. And this is currently being piloted in one of the larger irrigation schemes in Sri Lanka, where we're looking at the integration of the remote sensing-based assessments and water productivity indicators presented earlier, as well as incorporating built-in features to carry out additional remote sensing-based irrigation performance assessments and monitor user experience. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the location where it's being piloted. The reservoir is located in southern Sri Lanka. It has a command area of around 5,500 hectares, major crops, paddy, banana, and vegetables. And what we're trying to do here is to move away from the static picture of the scheme and its situation. It's on the left to a more dynamic and interactive one on the right. Next slide, please. So the indicators we're integrating into the system are those that are output from the PISABLE approach, the proposed irrigation performance indicators. So these are the ones that my colleagues presented earlier. I won't go into them into much detail, but we have the water consumed on the left, the biomass production in the middle, and the biomass water productivity on the right. And for this particular scheme, the biomass water productivity confirms what we already know, that in the tail end of the left bank canal, where you can see the orange areas, there is an issue with water delivery, and that's reflected as low water productivity in this instance. Next slide, please. So finally, building on and in addition to the water productivity assessments, we're also working on a series of knowledge products to disseminate and operationalize with the irrigation department, including a fine-scale dynamic surface water monitoring and storage model for the key reservoirs, such as the one presented in the last slide. And this is a portfolio of work to support the irrigation department and other line agencies to undertake flood and drought management using digital data and tools. And so the approach is summarized in this slide. Again, it's through an open source approach and integrates a lot of the key parameters that are also input into the PISABLE approach, as well as the agricultural performance and productivity assessments can be integrated using the data shown in the previous slides and the same indicators, which form a key aspect of this. Last slide, please. Okay, next slide, please, Lauren. Thank you. So the basis of the work which I presented was to support, as Jelle mentioned in the beginning, the Integrated Water Productivity Improvement Project, with the aim really of improving water management within selected river basins and the take-up of irrigation sub-projects for investment, incorporating various objectives, including improved management of water resources at the basin scale, modernization of irrigation infrastructure, and promotion of modern cropping and marketing systems. But by combining the remote sensing based outputs with other going initiatives, the reach and the application can be far greater. So I hope that this webinar and set of presentations have demonstrated that crop water productivity based indicators, including the examples we've seen, the evapotranspiration, the biomass production, the water deficits, as well as water productivity itself, provide a set of indicators to assess how well limited irrigation water is being used for its intended purpose to produce food, and that these indicators, when combined with other tools, can go far beyond reporting on crop water productivity. So really, in combination, these tools can be used to improve the planning, design, and management of irrigation systems. Through the modeling tools and the use of the remote sensing data which we presented, a suite of indicators have been calculated, which can be used to locate priority areas for investment. And when combined, the various suite of tools and associated indicators provide a more efficient way of developing and managing the biggest water use, irrigation. So the approaches also provide diagnostic tools and indicators to monitor and assess country investments and management plans. Thank you. Over to you, Lauren.
Great, thank you, Lisa. That was a really nice overview of the work that's been done and an applied case study in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much. We have a few minutes left, so I would like to welcome back our panel. If you could turn on your videos, and then I would also like to introduce Karthikeyan Matheswaran. He is a regional researcher at IHE, and his research involves combining model tools and Earth observation systems to provide evidence-based solutions for key water management problems, and he was really instrumental in this effort as well. So I will ask a few questions from the chat. We had many, so we won't be able to reach all of them today, but we will ask them later to the presenters and post them on the webinar website on the ADB platform. So I think we'll start with a question for Sajid. Someone asked about the Google Earth engine, and is this code for crop type mapping publicly available, and is it something that people can use, or is it only part of this project?
Yeah, hi. Yes, the code for Google Earth Engine, which we use for Karnataka, is so a similar kind of code is publicly available through our course, through our education course. So if he wants to get hold of it, then he or she wants to get hold of it, we can provide that. Sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can put that as part of our blended materials.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe this one is for Pulad. It's talking about what are the influences of soil nutrients, and would this impact the results from the remote sensing data that's used as an input?
Thank you, Lauren. Basically, soil nutrients are important for crop growth. So when we have like good level of nitrogen in the soil profile, we will have much more the vegetation growth. So vegetation growth is something that will be captured by remote sensing, and we can see the results in our estimates of water productivity. Thanks.
Great. And a question for Lisa and our IHE colleagues. What are the policy challenges for employing water productivity? This participant asked specifically about the Indian context, but if you have examples from other places as well, I think that's appreciated.
I think for the Indian context, in our experience, the challenge has mostly been in terms of using the data. So typically we find that it's really essential to combine the water productivity analyses with a capacity building program to ensure that the data can be interpreted, properly understood, and properly applied. So yes, I would say the importance of combining such approaches with capacity building really is essential.
Great. Yeah, I think those were some quick questions. There are a few more, and like I said, we will post them to our panel and put them on the website. So I would like to thank all of our speakers, starting with Yella and Pulad and Sajid and Lisa. I think these were really nice overviews of what is water productivity using remote sensing and how it can be applied. And just to remind you that more materials will become available in the upcoming weeks. So keep an eye out for your emails for more details about that. So thank you all for joining us. I appreciate how active you all were in the chat. And hopefully you can join us tomorrow at the same time for our other webinar on water accounting. Have a good day, everyone.